My name is Cheryl Cook. I'm the chairperson of Simsbury's Community for Care, and we'd like to welcome you tonight to a very important program. Tonight we are focusing on mindfulness, and with us we have school psychologist Kathy Ernst and school counselor Pam Sickinger, and they are going to join us for a discussion of the benefits of mindfulness. Participants will learn how a regular mindfulness practice can help people manage uncertainty and difficult emotions and also build resilience in addressing future challenges. And I think we can all agree that we could all use a little of that now. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. Thank you.
So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you take a look at this jar. And I'm going to have you imagine that the glitter in this jar is like the thoughts that you have when you're very stressed, mad, or upset. If you look, you see how it swirls, and it makes it really hard to see clearly. When your mind is swirling, it's not easy to think clearly, and sometimes that can lead to difficulty making good decisions or doing anything that requires you to really be focused. So don't worry, this is normal. It happens to everyone. Now, I want you to keep watching, watch the jar, and watch what happens when you're still for just a couple of moments. See how the glitter starts to settle and the water starts to clear? Your mind often works the same way. When you're calm for a little while, your thoughts start to settle and you start to see things much more clearly. So this evening we're going to be talking about mindfulness and how it can help work through those times when our minds are swirling and unclear, when we're experiencing difficult emotions. We will share many resources with you so you can continue to learn and to grow in your own practice of mindfulness.
So mindfulness is used in a lot of different ways, and you may have come across it in different contexts. So it's helpful, I think, just to start tonight with a foundation of the definition that we use, and this is from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is considered the founder of the modern mindfulness movement. So he says that mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So with mindfulness, we're paying attention to one thing, and that could be the breath, the sounds, movement, or some sort of activity. And we just try to keep our awareness in the present moment, but if our mind wanders, we don't judge that. What's really important is that when we notice that our mind is wandering, when we sort of start having those thoughts or planning for what's going to happen or ruminating about something else that's happened, that when we notice that we're able to bring our attention back to the object of focus. And that's not an easy thing to do. And a lot of people will say, they're just too distracted. I could never sit still for 5 minutes and just, focus on my breath. My mind is swirling. The brain is made to think. That's part of being human. So having thoughts is a human experience. And when we practice mindfulness, our goal is not to eliminate thoughts. We're looking at improving our ability to maintain our focus and to stay in the here and now. So instead of getting caught up in those stories that amp up our stress or anxiety, we stay focused on what's happening right now in the present moment. Okay, so that's what mindfulness is. I think we also need to touch on what mindfulness isn't. People who practice mindfulness, and I know Kathy and I have been doing this for at least 5 years, do not walk around in a constant state of calm. There's feelings, there's emotions, just like everybody else. What might be different, though, is how people who have a regular practice respond when those difficult emotions arise. And they are going to notice them, they're still going to feel those feelings, they still might react in a way that someone who doesn't practice reacts, but they have that ability to pause and make a choice about that response. And so the more you practice mindfulness, the more you build in the ability to notice before you get to that point where you're totally reacting to what's happening. So with mindfulness, again, your brain is going to think what we're trying to do when we practice mindfulness and build our focus is to keep from getting caught up in those stories. So one of the very simple things that we hear people use in their mindfulness practice for focus is their breath. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about using your breath. Mindfulness also is a secular practice. There are religions that incorporate different kinds of meditations, but all the training and the resources that we've used and are going to share with you tonight really trace their roots back to the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn. And just for a little history lesson, Dr. Kabat-Zinn was a scientist with a PhD in molecular biology, and he worked out of UMass Medical Center. And he did research on mind-body connection, studying how mindfulness might impact stress and pain. And that work developed into a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR for short. And today, those classes are widely available. You can take them online or at various places in the area. Okay, let's go here. So why do we need mindfulness? The last 2 years, everybody's life has been upended. Pandemic, the fears around that, the health concerns, being disconnected, economic impact, having to have your kids at home while you're trying to work at home. And then on top of that, you've got the political upheaval, you've got society reckoning with the inequities that have been in long-standing, increased violence, and of course the media just blaring it all out at you. And now we hear what is the new normal. And even that is hard to define because we still have people who haven't returned to work. We still have, some schools that are doing different levels of hybrid or distance learning. And the recommendations change every day about what we should expect and how we should be responding. So when you think about that, any one of those things could cause some emotional overload. And I know for myself, when I was watching the news for that last year and a half, constantly, my head felt like this slide. It was just so cluttered, so many things, so much uncertainty, and it was really hard to manage all that information coming at once. We can't change any of that. Those things are happening, and we are going to hear about them, and hopefully we're going in the right direction, but something else will come along, just as it does, and what we need to do is to learn how to better respond. So we need to develop some positive coping strategies. Some people use things like exercise or sleep. And mindfulness is just another tool that you can use to help you with coping with these difficult emotions. It doesn't require any special equipment, and you can do it anywhere. So it's very convenient, portable. We can't always stop and go for a run or take a nap. So having that ability to just take a moment and refocus and recenter can really be beneficial. There are some links at the end of this presentation to a number of articles specific to the impact of the pandemic and the benefit of mindfulness. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, there will be links available at the end. Okay. So when we are experiencing emotions, the outward expression is normal. So, if we're sad, we might be crying. If we're angry, we might be yelling. But we have to kind of keep check on when that starts to feel like it's out of balance. So, for example, something like avoidance. Normal avoidance might be, I have this project to do at work, and I really don't want to do it, so I'm procrastinating and I'm putting it off. But when it comes to the extreme, and you're not doing any of your projects, and you fall behind, and you're getting angry, and you're worried you might lose your job, that emotion has gone out of check. So, when we look at going from one extreme to the other, is mindfulness going to help us when we get out here? Probably not so much. But when we're here and we are learning and practicing, we hopefully can work on using mindfulness as a coping strategy so we don't get to that far extreme. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, and we're going to do a little practice.
So I'm going to let everybody, you can either close your eyes if you're comfortable with that, or you can just put your gaze down, whatever you're most comfortable with. I'm going to say a series of words describing different feelings or emotions that you may have had. And as I say each word, I want you to just silently acknowledge to yourself whether or not you have ever experienced it. Happy. Sad. Joyful. Frightened. Excited. Anxious. Peaceful. Restless. Doubtful. Strong. Weak. Depressed. Curious. Worried. Lonely. Special. Envious. Jealous. Mischievous. Disappointed. Angry. Hateful. Grateful. Loving. Now you can open your eyes. And mindfulness begins to teach us to notice when we're experiencing any of these emotions or feelings. It's not about always feeling positive or noticing positive emotions. It's about stopping and watching any emotion and how they feel in both our mind and our body, and maybe beginning to react differently than you have in the past. So I don't know how many of you have ever seen, or I didn't actually ever play with one, so I have to admit that, but one of those blow-up punching bags that they had sand in the bottom and you could punch them and they would go down to the ground. When you punch them, they fall all the way to the ground, right? And then they pop back up and they wobble back and forth and they wobble pretty far. Well, when you think about this, sometimes our mind is like that, right? We get hit with an emotion, and these emotions, as Pam said, happen to all of us, and they can be really big. But the idea with mindfulness is it's like you get knocked, sometimes you feel like you get knocked down, but with mindfulness, maybe you don't get knocked as far down. So maybe you don't hit the ground, kind of. But instead, you kind of stay more where you wobble, and you can begin to come back into balance more easily. So we're not offset as much. And it's partially because you're not getting hit as far off center with a little bit of practice. So we're going to actually do, Pam had mentioned using the breath as an anchor. So we're going to actually do a short mindfulness practice where we're going to use the breath. It's something that is happening all the time. And usually breath is something that's neutral. It's not a strong emotion. And it's not something that most of us hate or even really love. It's just kind of there. And it's with us continually, all the time. So we can always come back to the breath. So I'm going to have you just put your gaze down. And I'm going to ring the bell. And you can just listen to my guide. I'm going to have you start by taking one breath. Have your gaze down and take one deep breath in. Now take 3 breaths, but just normal breaths. Don't deliberately change it. Now take 3 breaths, and this time notice where in your body you feel your breath. Maybe you notice your breath at your chest, maybe you notice your breath in your belly, or maybe you notice your breath at your nostrils. Wherever it is, just follow the breath in this place for 3 entire breaths. Kind of as explained before, we call the place where you notice your breath the most obviously your anchor. It's the place where you can anchor your attention. Let's try this for about 30 seconds. And remember, if your mind wanders, it's meant to think. That's what our minds do. Just gently bring it back and notice your place of breath. And now I'm going to ring the bell again, and you can bring your gaze back up when you're comfortable. So now you've had a chance to practice a quick mindfulness of breath. It doesn't have to be long, doesn't even have to be as long as that 30 seconds. But breathing is something that's always happening, and you can always come back to it, and you can pay attention to it, and ground yourself when needed if you're feeling a really big emotion. So now we're going to talk about some of the benefits of mindfulness. And I think I will let Pam start with that, and I'll kind of jump in.
Okay. So there is a lot of research out there on mindfulness. It's really been around since the 1970s, so they've, I think, probably more so in the last 10 years, kind of gone a little further with it. But that research has proven, or I shouldn't say proven, but has shown that it can be beneficial. And some of the things that you see up here are where it has the positive impact. So, for paying attention, if you're learning how to focus on that anchor, on that breath, you're building that mental muscle that allows you to keep coming back to it and refocusing it as you want to. In terms of emotional regulation, mindfulness can help you to recognize when emotions are coming, like I mentioned before, when they're here, before they get here, so that you can pause, maybe take a couple of deep breaths, and think about how you're going to respond. And then in terms of resilience, mindfulness as a coping mechanism helps people to deal with adversity. And Rick Hansen is a mindfulness teacher, and he talks about the first and second darts. So when we have a difficult situation, that's the first dart. Something actually happens. That happens to all of us. We have a stressful day at work, we get in a fight with our friend, our picnic gets rained out. It's disappointing, it's upsetting, it makes us sad. But what really gets us is when we get caught up in that and we throw that second dart at ourselves. And the second dart is when we're ruminating and we're feeling resentful and we're staying up at night thinking about how upset or mad we are, and we're basically creating all this needless suffering for ourselves because we get caught up in the story. So the event itself has passed, we still are in the story. So if we can back out of that and disengage from that, we can then move forward. Do you want to jump in?
Yep, sure. So it can also help with adaptability. So it can help people to become more aware of certain patterns that they have. And as you become more aware sometimes of a pattern, you begin to be able to maybe make a choice and change some habitual behaviors. For example, there's a practice called urge surfing that can be used when somebody's craving a hit. So they can, rather than giving into it or fighting against it, they learn how to notice it, maybe acknowledge how it feels in their body, and then kind of ride the wave until it passes. Mindfulness can also help to build compassion. It helps people become more aware of their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own senses, and this can help grow then with their understanding of what other people may be experiencing. And there are some practices within mindfulness. Loving kindness is a mindfulness practice, and in that practice they begin to acknowledge compassion for themselves and for other people. And the last thing that mindfulness can be a benefit, is in some cases calming. So there are breathing pieces of mindfulness and other practices that do actually relax the body. Sometimes there's a body scan mindfulness practice, which can give people access to, a piece of mind or a piece of body. And that would be, you can learn how to do that independent of the external circumstances. So Pam talked a lot about how you maybe have something that happens that you have no control over that might influence you, but you can kind of learn how to find that calm amidst kind of the chaos. So for the next thing that we're going to share is Dr. Sickinger and I have both been practicing mindfulness for a while, and we've been bringing it to the high school. And so we're going to share a couple of examples of what we've found with actual students. So I don't know if you want to talk about the AP project first. Do you want to do that?
Okay, so I was kind of surprised last year during all the craziness. We had hybrid learning at the high school, but life goes on and AP research goes on and students have to do their projects. So a senior approached me and asked if I would help her with a project looking at mindfulness and its impact on students' test anxiety. So she did a survey before we started, and we had 2 AP English groups, and one was the control group, so we didn't do any intervention with them. And the other one I visited for 8 weeks and taught mindfulness, did mindfulness practices. And at the end, she resurveyed them and found that there was a statistically significant decline in their test anxiety. And she also found a negative correlation between the level of test anxiety and the level of the person's mindfulness. So it was a small sample, but we've done action research like this at the school over the last 5 years, and have found similar results that during the practice and certainly doing it over time, those benefits are available. And so now I'm going to let Kathy talk a little bit about her project and another group of students.
So I actually took a year-long course in teaching mindfulness, and so as part of that class, I had to push into a classroom and teach 6 weeks of mindfulness. And I had to collect pre- and post data, as well as then I had to get information, like answer some questions, so I get more anecdotal information from the students as well. And so I was in a 9th grade science class, and I collected data around stress levels, impulsivity, self-esteem, and then overall like mindfulness and how they thought that impacted them. And what I found is the data indicated that after 6 weeks of a weekly mindfulness practice, I pushed in for 15 minutes, the students reported that a significant decrease in stress levels, as well as a significant decrease in impulsivity. So it didn't necessarily increase their self-esteem, and they weren't necessarily jumping up and down to do their own mindfulness practice, but it did have some positive benefits. In addition, when I asked them all kinds of questions and they had to ask, how mindfulness had helped them, they wrote down things like, it helped me relax, it helped relieve stress, it helped when taking tests, it helped me in calming down, it helped me focus in class, and it helped me focus on my sport. So the students were, anecdotally reporting, and not every student saw that benefit, but there was a lot of good benefits, and that was just, after 6 weeks of one class. So, I think mindfulness can help a lot of people, and we're seeing some of the benefits when we do it with students. So we have a little video here for you, and this is about building neural connections. This is from the creator of the mindfulness app called Headspace, and it discusses the science behind how regularly practicing mindfulness can positively impact the brain. So, oops.
Brain activity during meditation looks very different depending on
Figure out how to do the volume. Sorry.
Meditation.
All right. We good?
Yep.
I'm Dr. Yurande Pierce,
nope.
a neuroscience researcher who studies the many...
I didn't actually try the video.
different functions of the brain. You may have found yourself saying, I know this makes me feel great, but why do I have to do it every day?
It's
Today
just really
we're going
low.
to take a look at all the positive benefits of regular meditation practice can have on your brain. You may have heard that meditation can improve your mood, increase your ability to focus, and lower levels of stress.
I'll play it
But
again.
have you ever wondered why? We can actually shape our brains.
Okay, so let's try this again.
Activity during meditation looks very different depending on how long you've been practicing meditation. I'm Dr. Yurande Pierce, a neuroscience researcher who studies the many different functions of the brain. You may have found yourself saying, I know this makes me feel great, but why do I have to do it every day? Today we're going to take a look at all the positive benefits of regular meditation practice can have on your brain. You may have heard that meditation can improve your mood, increase your ability to focus, and lower levels of stress. But have you ever wondered why? We can actually shape our brains throughout our lives through a process called neuroplasticity, which is the nervous system's ability to restructure itself in response to internal and external input. It's not the number of brain cells that are important for a healthy brain to function, but the number of connections between them that benefits us most. Although it may seem like we're asking our entire bodies to be still, our brains are quite active when we're meditating. Any kind of brain activity promotes neuroplasticity, but there is such a thing as a bad connection. Rumination, or getting stuck with one negative way of thinking, can strengthen our emotion tied to stress and anxiety. When we meditate, we focus on strengthening the neural connections we want and weakening others. Because we can't exactly just take a peek into a healthy living brain, it's hard to directly study how meditation affects these connections. When comparing the brain activity of both novice and expert meditator, you'll see that the beginner meditators have a lot more brain activity while meditating. Which makes sense, because when you're learning something new, you're still working to overcome the habitual ways thoughts flow through your mind. But when we become more experienced meditators and become better at achieving a meditative brain state, our brain activity is mostly in three main areas. The first is the caudate, which is thought to have a role in allowing us to note and let go from thoughts or information we don't want to engage while meditating. second is the entorhinal cortex, which is thought to control our thoughts and also prevent mind wandering. And last but not least is the medial prefrontal cortex, which is thought to support the enhanced self-awareness we feel while meditating. Meditation has shown to increase grey matter in the brain in a few key areas, meaning it's a great way to combat the natural decline of grey matter in the brain that happens as we age. The biggest changes are seen in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for complex thinking processes like concentrating on a task or making difficult decisions. It also plays a big role in our ability to resist distractions. So as it becomes bigger, we can more selectively focus and sustain our attention more easily. Meditation has also been shown to shrink the amygdala, which is also known as the fear center of the brain. The amygdala activates our physical and emotional responses to perceived danger, commonly known as the fight or flight response. Having a smaller amygdala reduces the capacity of our body to respond this way to the small stresses in life. In turn, this decreases our overall levels of anxiety, stress, and fear. After a meditation, you feel great, but these good feelings can wear off, like a drug that stops working over time. In order to really strengthen these changes, consistency in your practice is key. It may be helpful to think about meditation as doing exercise for your brain. So even if you're struggling to fully enter a meditative state at the beginning, you can take solace in knowing that you're gaining long-term benefits for your brain. I'm Dr. Yewande Pierce. Thank you very much for watching.
So, as you can see, there are some actual changes to the brain, and that can happen with mindfulness and a regular mindfulness practice. There's a lot of research. Dr. Rick Hansen, who Pam had mentioned earlier, has some great videos out there also about what he calls like neurons that fire together, wire together, right? And how you can hardwire yourself to kind of actually bring in happiness. So the more you can tie those experiences of happiness or savor them for a moment, which you can do with a mindfulness practice, the more likely you are to kind of lay down that neural network towards happiness. And I sometimes explain it when I'm talking to kids as like you can picture a large thing of grass, right? And one way you've walked and you've tamped down the grass. And if that's a really negative thought pattern, that's the way that's tamped down. But it doesn't have to be the only way. You can always begin to tamp down another pathway. And that's kind of how your brain, I like to think of that as how your brain is working. So if you practice, taking a breath and you practice kind of savoring those moments of happiness, you begin to tamp down a different way of thinking instead of maybe just that negative way of thinking. So now if I can figure out how to get out of here. This guy here. I don't want to play it on TV. Nope, I don't want to do that. Escape, thank you.
There we go.
Escape will be good. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So we've talked about breathing, and we've talked about how how meditation can help your brain and how you can practice. And I think most people would say, when am I going to have time to fit this in with my exercise and my work and my kids and all these other things that I have? So one way of including mindfulness and working on that practice is to actually insert it into some of the activities that you do on a daily basis. So a lot of times we just kind of go through the emotions on autopilot and we're really not aware of what's happening. So how many of you have seen somebody out walking and talking on their cell phone at the same time? How many of you have eaten a meal, barely remember what you had, much less what it tasted like? Okay. And my very favorite is you arrive at work and you're getting out of your car and you realize you do not even remember the drive. So we're doing these activities without paying attention because our minds are in our stories somewhere else. So if we want to be more mindful, we can take some of these things that we do every day and use that as our mindfulness time. And there's a mental performance coach, his name is Brian Kane, and he said, it's not about being present, it's not about being perfect, it's about being present. So if you're doing it and you get off on a little story or something, that's okay. You just bring yourself back. So these are some examples from a book called The Mindful Day by Laurie Cameron. And I'll just talk through a little bit. So when you're walking, maybe start by taking a couple of deep breaths. Take a few minutes, pay attention to where your feet come in contact with the ground, and really allow yourself to feel connected. And then start walking slowly. Notice your legs moving, notice how your feet move, and any other sensations you're feeling in your body. And then you start to go at a normal pace, and you pick something to focus on. So it could be your breath, or it could be sounds that you're hearing in the environment. And then as you continue to walk, you start paying attention to what information is coming in through your senses. So what are you smelling, and what are you seeing, and what are you hearing, and what are you feeling? With eating, kind of the same thing. You start off with a few deep breaths, kind of sit down, prepare, probably a few less distractions, so no phone. But even before taking a bite, just looking at your plate and thinking about all the people who are responsible for getting that to your table. The farmers, the laborers, the truck drivers, the person who cooked the meal. And just, express some gratitude. It can be out loud, it can be silent, whatever is your preference. And then look at what you see and smell. Take the first bite, and when you take that first bite, feel what it feels like in your mouth. And feel how it feels different in different parts of your mouth, and how it tastes, and are there different flavors. And just savor every bite. So instead of shoveling it all in, you sit there and you actually experience what it is to have. And I guarantee you will remember that meal. And then finally, writing. Writing is a great way, journaling, either free form or a gratitude journal or some sort of prompt. Just, gathering yourself in a space where, again, you're free from distractions. Focus on what you're about to write about. Start writing, and as you're writing, just notice if any emotions are coming up. But don't judge yourself. Just kind of be in that moment. And then at the end, review what you wrote and give yourself a little thank you for the self-care. And then you can always finish with a few deep breaths. So you can build these kinds of things into your daily routine. And I will put a little challenge out there. Hopefully some of you will take that to heart and try that in the next couple of weeks. Okay.
So with that said, we've got another mindfulness practice. And this one is actually a little bit longer than the last one that we did. And it's Mindfulness of Sound. And I really like the practice for Mindfulness of Sound because, similar to your breath, there's always usually some kind of sound going on around us. And so it's a good anchor and something that you can often find, whether you're outside taking a walk or whether you're in a classroom or whether you're just sitting and maybe all you hear is like the heater in the background, right? So many different things, and so you can usually come back to that as a pretty easy anchor. So I'm going to have you take a moment again and kind of sit upright, both feet flat on the floor. And I'm going to have you allow your eyes either to close again or soften your gaze. And just begin to notice what is happening right for you right now and letting yourself just be as you are. And I'm again going to ring the bell, and I just want you to listen to the sound until it fades away completely. Now, as best you can, take your attention to your breath. Notice each breath and sense how the chest rises at the inhale and falls away on the exhale. We're going to start with your breath as your anchor in this present moment. Each time your mind wanders away from the breath, simply notice it without judgment. Bring your attention back to the breath. There's no need to control or manipulate the breath in any way. Simply allow the breath to breathe with its own natural rhythm. And now, as best you can, begin to change the anchor of your practice from your breath to noticing the sounds all around you. Direct your attention to the soundscape and to the actual sensation of sound. Sound is a perfect object of mindfulness, as we hear only the sounds of this moment. We don't hear the sounds of the past or sounds of the future. What is being heard in this moment? There's no need to identify the sound or to try to figure it out in any way. Just notice the quality of the sound, observing the sounds of each moment. Noticing where your mind is right now. Has it bounced into the future? Into planning? Or are you rehashing the past? Just notice where your attention goes in the silent moments. And with kindness, bring your attention back to the soundscape that's all around you. There's no need to reach out and search for sounds. Fall into receptivity. Perhaps without really moving, have the intention of leaning back just the slightest bit. You can imagine placing the attention right at the opening of your ears and let the sounds come to you. Each time the mind wanders away, kindly bring the attention back to the sounds of this moment. Notice them. Perhaps you might also notice an automatic sense of liking some sounds more than others. Bird songs might register as more pleasant than the rumble of a garbage truck. Just notice this. Everything is actually just the sound of the moment. It's only a wave of sound. First, there is only the sound itself, and then the liking or disliking of it. You are the one who is hearing and adding the interpretation and judgment, if any. Letting it be just as it is. What are the sounds of this moment? And now begin shifting again, moving the attention away from sounds and back to your breath. Notice a breath in and a breath out. Resting in the observation of the breath in your own good company. And when you're ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes.
So just kind of wrapping up here, we're going to go through some slides with some resources that we recommend. But, you know, when we spend our time reliving the bad experiences or worrying about the bad things that could happen in the future, we lose that only time that we actually have, which is right now. If you don't feel like you have time to practice mindfulness, that's when you probably need it the most. I encourage all of you to, come back to the resources we're going to share. A lot of these we have used as we've done training and as we've worked with other people and done things like professional development and classroom lessons. So I'm going to. We kind of divided these out by the age group, and children. They're able to understand mindfulness, but they learn best by play. So if you have it structured like a game, they can engage with you and be learning mindfulness and not even realize that that's what they're doing. There's also some great parenting books. Children self-regulate from the adults around them. And the more aware a parent is of their emotions and their ability to regulate, the better the child's going to be able to anchor to your calmness. So you want to talk about anything?
Sure. So I can tell you I've used, I use mindful games. I've used that in working in classrooms. I've actually used it with my own kids, and there's everything from in one class I created a pinwheel, and you practice learning about your breath by blowing on the pinwheel, and then they got to take the pinwheel home. There's ones where you get a buddy and you put it on your stomach and everybody lays down and they have a buddy and they practice learning how to breathe using a belly buddy. Sitting Still Like a Frog is a little book and has a CD that comes with it. There's probably an online version at this point in time, but I used this with my own kids when they were little, and they really liked some of them. They're silly. There's one called the Spaghetti Factory, which they thought was great. And so I think that one is kind of a different kind of engagement, but those are actually, the practices are led. So if you as a parent aren't sure what to do, that's a good turn to. And then the Whole Brain Child, this actually has a book and a workbook. And this is a great resource. It's about managing your emotions. It talks about the brain, how to talk to your kids about the brain, and how to begin that practice for you and for your family and reflect on it using the workbook.
Okay. Mind Up is a curriculum. Goldie Hawn has a foundation, and she's actually developed an evidence-based program. There's curriculum for schools and there's curriculum for families, so you can purchase this and use this at home. Mindfulness for Kids is at the website mindful.org. That's a great resource for all things mindfulness. So there's a good article, there's some activities, they sometimes will have some little audio. And then the Mindfulness for Kids and Families, this is from Susan Kaiser Greenland. She is also the author of the Mindful Games book. And she has a site which has a lot of audio and video activities, and there's actually a how-to on doing a mini retreat for your family. So how do you incorporate that as a family activity? Okay, so the teenagers, they're not going to want to do this so much with you. They're going to want to do it a little more independently. And, they love the technology. They love things that they can do kind of on their own. The first two things on here, My Life and Smiling Mind, are apps, and they're geared toward that age group. My Life actually says this is for the under 25 generation. I like Smiling Mind because it has practices based on different age groups, and it has specific things like mindfulness for sports, mindfulness for test anxiety, the kinds of things that they're experiencing at that point in their development. And then the mindfulness cards are a deck of cards, and you can pull one out, and so it kind of keeps the practice interesting, and they can choose a different one every day or one every week, and they're exercises for both mind and body.
Growing Mindful, it's actually just a different set of cards with different mindfulness activities. So you could have 100 and some different activities that you could do around mindfulness. But that same concept of pull out a card, let's try this and see what happens. The mindfulness for teen anxiety, there's...
Because you're standing away from it.
Oh, sorry.
Mindfulness for teen anxiety is, again, a workbook that you could work through with the teen, and it walks them through kind of different emotions and why they might be feeling those, as well as then mindfulness practices related to that. And then the self-compassion workbook for teens is a similar workbook where they can kind of work through what their big emotions are and begin a mindfulness practice and gear it towards being more self-compassionate.
Okay. So the adult resources are many and varied. There are lots of places to learn to practice. There are lots of books available. Lots of online resources, and I'll talk about Copper Beach a little bit over in West Hartford. They offer all kinds of different meditations. They offer retreats. They have a weeknight practice group, and that is really grown since we first started connecting with them. And they do a lot of good work in the community, helping, with people who might not normally have access. UMass Medical Center, we talked about with John Cabot-Zinn. And then Mindful Schools, that is where several people in our high school took courses through there. They also have a curriculum, and Kathy did the advanced training for her certification.
Can you talk about Goodreads?
Oh, sure. Goodreads is a mindfulness, is a book site where you can get recommendations and reviews, and the link that's on here takes you to the reviews of books that are on the theme of mindfulness. So if you're not sure where to start, you can read through there a little bit. It'll give you some ideas.
And Say What You Mean is a book by Oren J. Sofer, and it is a really great book to lead you into some mindfulness around communication. So if you're lacking communication with anyone in your life, it could be your spouse, it could be somebody at work, it could be your kids. It's a great book because it kind of talks about how to communicate and then actually has mindfulness practices with it. And then the Mindfulness at Work is an article that kind of reviews the research on mindfulness in the workplace, and it has different ways that people might be able to implement it, and talks a lot about the leadership and mindfulness. And then we have apps. Apps are like a great thing for mindfulness, and there's a lot of them out there. We could probably come up with another 10, but the ones that Pam and I both kind of, I know we both actually have subscriptions to Calm and 10% Happier. And so I think all of these have some version that's free. Typically the way they work in today's day and age is they give you 7 days for free, and then you either buy a monthly or a yearly subscription. Calm, I believe, has some that are free all the time. So I think there's a daily Calm. But I like Calm because if you're really just starting in mindfulness, it is truly, truly secular, and it's very just mindfulness based. 10% Happier is with Dan Harris, and he gives kind of a more realistic version of mindfulness, because he was a mindfulness skeptic at first. And so that's what it's based on, is like, how do I help you not be a skeptic of mindfulness? Headspace I've used with students. It is geared towards, I believe it asks them questions sometimes, so it'll gear their mindfulness practice towards maybe what they're feeling in the moment. And then both Pam and I have used Insight Timer. I haven't used that one recently, but Pam, we were just talking about it actually at dinner, about how it has a lot of different ways to meditate, and it has a lot to offer.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Sure.
Is there anything for older adults? I know sometimes older adults, they're anxious just because their minds aren't working as well as they used to.
Yep.
And I noticed you kind of stop at the sort of working adult level. And I'm just wondering if there's any hints for people who maybe are moving into retirement. They, all sorts of things have happened over the last few years when older adults are now switching gears to new things.
That's where I think the apps really are helpful, because they're very simple to use, and they're more geared to any adult, but there are different ones for you might go on and have a practice for just learning the basics of mindfulness, or you might have one for dealing with stress or dealing with anxiety, and I believe the AARP had something recently about mindfulness for seniors. So from the benefit of, as you saw in the video, with the benefits for the brain, certainly helpful for cognition as well. So, yep, okay.
Yeah, and I think Calm, that app is just fantastic, and there is a daily free Calm. So you could practice that 10 minutes daily, free.
Yep.
And get you started and decide that you like it, but you don't have to really even sign in. Do you know what I mean? So like if you're looking at somebody who's struggling with that, if you can just help them get the app on and say, all you have to do is click on this app and open it, you can do a daily practice with this.
And then these are just some websites if you want to do any further research or want to look for some training opportunities. Mindful.org, I mentioned a few minutes ago. UCLA has a Mindful Awareness Center. Brown University has a Mindfulness Center. They're doing lots of research at these university levels. Yale has one as well. Greater Good Science Center is at California, Berkeley, and they have an online, presence of articles and practices, but they also offer trainings, and Kathy and I were fortunate enough to do some training out there. And then the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, and just learning when we talk about needing self-care and kindness, learning how to do that for ourselves. And at this point, we'll ask questions. So anybody have any questions? We'll take that. I just love dogs. I love dogs. Yeah.
Study you said you're trying things at school, with kids. Are you still doing that? Was that a one-time thing, or?
Yep. So actually, Kathy and I are doing a series of 3. We have a period called Connect in the school. So once or twice a month, the students have about a 25-minute period where they're doing different kinds of team building activities. We're focusing on social emotional learning. And Kathy and I are doing a series of 3 of those, which basically means the whole school is getting some introduction. And then I know in the health classes, they do some units on that. But we have, as a open to the faculty, weekly practices that we do as a group. So we try to, push in when we can. Classroom time is very precious, so it's not as easy all the time to do that. And kids are very busy after school, so we don't get them after school too much. But we're really excited about the Connect opportunity.
We do.
That's at the high school.
At the high
Correct,
school.
we're at the
yeah.
high school.
So the counselors and the wellness department at Henry James are also doing it, and I think they're more systematic in terms of being able to do it during classroom time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we have individuals, like I just had a teacher reach out and say, could I come in and do 2 mindfulness lessons in his classroom? So I'll go in and do 2 mindfulness lessons, and it'll be basics or just a practice here and there. And in the past, with COVID and the pandemic, this hasn't happened, but sometimes we've offered like, I think it was like a 3-week time period where we called it Finding Your Balance. And we offered the ability for us, everybody who's been kind of trained in doing some mindfulness within the guidance department, we set up a calendar and teachers could sign up and have us come in and do a practice. Maybe it was about test anxiety, maybe it was about sound, maybe it was about gratitude, whatever. And we would push in for those 3 weeks. And so try to reach as many students as we can.
Going along the line of what you're doing for the students, and I know Sherry had mentioned the question for the teachers. Is this something that, thinking of the teachers with the support system that they need also, from K to 12? So how do you develop a program that enables the teachers, and we know many of them could benefit from that. We all could benefit from this. So how do you feel that they would be able to respond to this kind of program?
But I have to tell you, when we have our professional development days, typically we are asked to present, and the last one that we did, which was pre-COVID, the room was packed. So the interest is there when the opportunity, like a professional development day, presents itself to have that free time to actually do it. It works well. We have a pretty small core group that meets weekly. We have two times a week that we meet, but that's open to anybody in the building. And during the last year when we had kids online and whatever, we actually even had teachers coming in online to work with us. So just to keep everybody feeling safe and comfortable.
Okay, I'm going to push a little further. How about the parents? Because when children are stressed, parents are stressed. Mm-hmm. So how could you integrate this with the parents? I know many of them that hopefully will be able to listen to this and watch this, mm-hmm. but, would benefit from something, and I think the interest would be there for them. I'm just thinking the PTOs, could offer, broadcast this to the parents that probably do not know about this, mm-hmm. because many of the parents, especially with COVID and students working from home and studying from home, are also feeling that stress level. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that you could offer this to the greater parent community, school mm-hmm. community?
Well, one of the things we're doing in our department, we just started a newsletter, so we are sending out resources through that. A lot of like what we have on here, and I think certainly with if the interest was there, I mean, we're passionate about this, so we love speaking to people.
I know that some of the other people who also practice mindfulness in our department, and of course we're speaking only of the high school because that's our lived experience, but just did a mindfulness practice with a parent who came in the other day. The parent was upset, and the school counselor said, hey, have you ever heard of mindfulness? I've got this great app, why don't we try it? And she did a mindfulness practice with the parent right there, just to kind of help just bring it down a notch, and so I think those of us who do know about it are putting it out there where we can with parents. I don't know what they're doing at the elementary level. I know I live in a different district, and I know they're doing kind of more systematic at the elementary level, and they send home something telling us what I could do at home. So I don't know if that's happening at the elementary level, but that's just a simple sheet of paper with a practice that they're doing in school, and then have your child teach it to you.
Yeah. And one of the goals that I have for myself this year is to create a social emotional learning library for families virtually, which is going to stretch me a little bit in my technology, but I'm hoping that will be a place where people can access those resources as well. Okay. Anybody else? Well, thank you. And we do have all the links for all of the resources. So if you're interested in just getting a copy of the links so you can check out some of those, you can leave your name and your email with us, and we'll send those out to you.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
in, and thank you for speaking to the choir.